As always, the session is recorded so that it's shared later on our YouTube channel. So when the time comes for questions and reflections, if you would like to ask or share something and don't want it recorded, just say so and I'll hit the pause button. Let's sit tall and close the eyes. Place the right hand on the heart, left hand on the belly. Constantly coming into that practice of connection with the breath. Noticing everything there is to notice about the inhale. Everything there is to notice about the exhale. And the noticing is not frantic. It's not looking for something. It's just being present to what is. A soft awareness, coupled perhaps with compassion, and also with a gentle curiosity. Let the exhale be just a little bit longer than the inhale. Notice how extending the exhalation shifts and changes just a little bit your experience of the breath, your experience of your physical body, and maybe the experience of yourself. And then draw the hands together in front of the heart. We'll lift our voices in one Om, followed by the invocation mantras, taking a breath in. Om. Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha Hari Om. Ganana Antva Ganapati Gum Havamahe Kavin Kavinam Upamashravastamam Jesta Rajam Brahmanan Brahmanaspata Anashrinvanuti Bisidha Sadhanam Mahaganapataye Namaha Prano Devi Saraswati Vajebhir Vajini Vati Dhinama Vitriyavatu Ano Divo Brahataf Parvatada Saraswati Yajata Gantu Yagnyam Havan Devi Jujushana Kritachi Shagmam Novacha Bhushati Shrinotu Vagdevyai Namaha. And gently releasing the hands down, fluttering the eyes open. And so today I thought we would talk a little bit about discipline and strictness and the difference between these two things and what role they play in our spiritual path and what's considered to be our spiritual awakening. And so the first thing is to say that there is a major difference between these two words. And it's unfortunate that in our society we have a tendency to take a bunch of words that actually mean something a little different from each other and put them all into the same box. We say anger, frustration, irritation, impatience, they all fall under one, I'm angry, So we have this tendency, we say, love, niceness, kindness, compassion, pity fall within one box. But they don't. They're very different from one another. Strict and discipline are also very different from one another. One has compassion and one does not. One has a particular personalized intention, a goal, and one doesn't. One is about empowerment. It's about seeing things through. It's a part of a process. And the other is not. So the word strict, if someone tells you strictly, are they telling you something about your path, something about your journey, something about your self-realization? Or are they more or less telling you that you have to follow a set of rules whether you want to or not? You have to apply these rules and these beliefs whether you want to or not. I was raised in a very strict Irish home, and I love my nana, but she's strict. And dinner was every night at 5 o'clock. And if you showed up at 5:01, then you didn't get dinner. Strict. No compassion there. No, not that my grandmother wasn't compassionate, because she was. But I'm just saying, like, strict is about playing by the rules, period. It's about doing what you're told. It's about following someone else's lead. And it's also about, that's an interesting set of words I'm going to choose here, ignorant faith. I would never expect anybody to come here and to do exactly what I told them to do because I told them to do it. I think that that's ignorant faith. Instead, when students come and they talk and they request guidance, I make suggestions to them. And one of the things that I will constantly say is, you have to try this on for size. You can be aware of what's happening and how this behavior is affecting you. And you can make the choice about the changes that you're going to make. And these tools might be the ones to help you. And then a student's ability to cultivate discipline within themselves is what's going to allow them to test out those suggestions. To be honest with themselves about what they find. To use their analytical skills consistently and in a dedicated fashion in order to stay focused more effectively on what it is that they're looking to accomplish or acquire for themselves. But if a student just comes in here and says, what do? Well, I'll do A, B, C, D, and E. Just do that. That's strictness. That's the thing that I find that lacks there is compassion. The thing that I find lacks in strictness is also faith. Because you know what? Sometimes my suggestions don't work out for you. But I have 100% faith that what I suggest to you, that what I offer you, has a role to play. It has a role to play in your greater discovery of your own self. Your discovery of yourself is not about me or any other teacher. Your discovery about of yourself is about you. And you can follow blindly anything and anybody that you want to. But if you're following something or someone blindly, then what is it that you're discovering about you? We have to practice, cultivate within ourselves the analytical ability to know that we are seeing clearly, to know that we are feeling and thinking clearly, to know that we are acting decisively and clearly, and to know that all of these behaviors are in line with the ultimate goal of self-knowledge. And I'm not saying that there isn't a time for prescriptive practices. Of course there is. There's a time for prescriptive practices. It all depends on where the student is coming from and who the student is. So for some students, they come and they say, can I have mantra diksha? And I say, of course you can have mantra diksha. But you don't understand what the requirement is. So there's the requirement in mantra diksha. And the requirement is an intensified mantra practice on a daily basis, no excuses. And if you're not ready for that, if you don't have the discipline cultivated within yourself in order to follow that, then now is not the time. Don't take that vow if you yourself are not willing to put the time in necessary for that particular practice. And then it's up to the student. Are they going to be honest with themselves, or are they going to say, yeah, I really want to do this because I want to have, this experience? It's like, well, mantra diksha is not about having a particular experience other than an experience of the self and connection with divinity. That's what it's about. So it's not, like a woo-woo practice where, we get to run around and say, I took mantra diksha. Yeah, did you take mantra diksha? I took mantra diksha. No, it's not like that. So in that moment, the student needs to have the discipline within themselves to be able to recognize, am I ready, am I not ready? And the same is true about everything in life. The student needs to cultivate within themselves the ability to see, am I ready or am I not ready? Are my eyes open or are they closed? Or are they kind of halfway open? Is there such a thing as halfway open? Is my behavior violent? Is my behavior not violent? So discipline allows us to ask the question and to accept the answer truthfully. Strictness, on the other hand, doesn't allow for the exploration. It doesn't really allow for the question. It's do it, period. Does that make sense? Which one do you think is more beneficial for you in your spiritual path?
Discipline.
The discipline. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Very wise. I agree. The discipline is far more beneficial because there's learning involved and there's self-responsibility and there's cultivation of understanding and awareness. And without those things, we can't come into a deeper relationship with ourselves or with others. If all we're going to do is let someone else dot our I's and cross our T's through strict adherence to someone else's guidelines. Now, it's okay to have adherence to the guidelines. That's absolutely fine. 100% disciplined adherence. Remember why you're doing it. Remember why. Now, if you follow this thought process, and you're in the midst of an intense sadhana, and you're having a moment of crisis, faith crisis, and you say to yourself, do I have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning again and do this? Maybe today I'll just sleep in. The disciplined adherence gives you the ability to say to yourself, to accept responsibility for yourself for that decision. Because you know that if there's too many mornings of sleeping in, it's going to impact your process and progress of self-discovery. But if you just get up because someone else told you to, then what you're going to cultivate is resentment for the practice, resentment for that person, and potentially resentment for yourself. So I think that part of today's talk is oriented toward choose your words carefully and understand that there's a difference. There's absolutely a difference. Do you want to be a strict parent or do you want to be a disciplined parent? Do you want to be a strict partner or do you want to be a disciplined partner? Do you want to be a strict employee or a disciplined employee? Do you want to be a strict friend or a disciplined friend? It's your choice. That's your free will. You can be whichever one you want. You can change back and forth as much as you like to. But the suggestion would be that to be the disciplined person has far more benefit to you and to those around you than to be that person who is unbending, who is not inquiring and not fully exploring the potential of their own self. Beautiful thing about discipline is it requires a certain kind of strength. And that strength, that certain kind of strength, comes from feeling or seeing or knowing the importance of the self. Like, we might not be able to put it into words. We might not be able to say, well, I know exactly why I come to Wisdom Circle every Sunday. It just might be a calling of sorts that we can't quite put into words, why we keep showing up. But the keep showing up part, the empowerment of listening to your own heart about what it is that you're doing, the recognition that, well, I go because I get little tidbits here and there about, how life could possibly be if I were to try this or try that, personal empowerment, et cetera, and so on, whatever words you want to put to it. That's discipline. Discipline is showing up, even though you don't have to, because you know that there's a process. There's a process that's going to be beneficial, healthy for you. Beneficial and healthy for those immediately around you and potentially for those further away. A strict person is more likely, and again, I'm using these two words in very specific meanings. So a person who is strict might tend to be a person who is also judgmental, who is critical in a harsh way, who has little patience for others, for anyone who doesn't do it the same way that they do it. But a disciplined person is an individual who can see and appreciate the struggle of others, can see and appreciate their own struggle, that doesn't feel that they need to hide behind some glimpse of perfection because they know that they are a work in progress. A disciplined individual has an enjoyment for life. Because while it's not easy to be disciplined, and the two do look very similar, they're doing it of their own free will. They're making the choice actively versus passively to follow a particular methodology. Does that make sense? Any questions or reflections so far? No? Okay. An individual who is strict about their practice, their sadhana, no matter what it might be, might not have quite as much space for love in that practice. It might just be about getting to the 1,200 malas, getting to the headstand. If I do this number of practices, then I will get this. And so no matter what, I'm going to do those practices every day. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but I also think that there's a little bit of wiggle room that's not included there. There's lots of texts out there that say, do 54 of these, 87 of those, 108 of these every single day at these particular times, and in so many days, months, weeks, years, you'll be enlightened. But in that process of strict adherence to a formula, where's the cultivation of connection? Where's the love? Where's the reminder? Yes, be disciplined about your practices, absolutely. But even in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, even in many of the other scriptures, it says, in Ayurveda, it teaches, the practice must be appropriate to the condition that the student shows up in. So there are practices that are not appropriate every single day. Take women, for example. If you're on your cycle, inversions are not appropriate. Take people with heart disease. Anything that puts the head below the heart is not appropriate. Holding the breath is not appropriate. So there's got to be a little bit of wiggle room to allow for the condition of the student. And that wiggle room can only come from compassion. And to me, in this particular application of these two words, compassion is married to discipline, i.e. compassionate discipline, versus strictness, which it is not married to. I've had so many beautiful teachers in my life. I've been so very fortunate. And this one teacher shared a story about strictness in teaching yoga. And he said, this is years and years ago, he was sharing this story of a person who went to a class and I guess they were doing a down dog and they were getting the heels to the floor. And so the teacher was very much, your heels have to go to the floor. And I don't know if he gave him an adjustment or what happened, but all of a sudden there was a pop. Yeah, you all cringed, didn't you? I know, me too. And his Achilles tendon ruptured. Yeah. Where's the compassion there? Number one, accidents happen, that's true, but this was not an accident. This was a force. And then the second thing was, when the student fell down to the ground, the teacher looked at him and said, "What's wrong?" And he said, I heard something. I think, I might have ruptured something. My Achilles tendon, it just doesn't feel. He said, "What tendon?" Of the mindset that pain is not real. Strict adherence to the process without compassion equals injury. Physically, psychologically, spiritually. But discipline, married with compassion and understanding the process to some degree, equals progress toward understanding the self and healing of the self through that understanding. Heels go toward the floor, but they don't have to go there. They don't have to ever get there. We'll have no pops in class. No. The compassionate component of discipline is very important because otherwise discipline becomes strictness. If we don't marry the compassion in there, then we have no reason to even consider that someone might be in a different condition than we are. Without the compassion, we would expect every single person in this room to act the exact same way. None of you are to be on a different part of the path. None of you are to be struggling differently than the other. You should all be able to cultivate the same amount of willpower. Get over yourselves. Not too compassionate, is it? No. But instead, the discipline is actually turned inward more than it is outward. Strict is mostly out, a little bit in. Discipline is mostly in, a little bit out. Because the discipline, when married with compassion, allows me to regulate my vision so that when I'm seeing each of you, I'm seeing each of you. Not a cookie cutter. Why can't you all be the same? Why can't you all be like me? Why can't you all be like her? Why can't you all be something? No. The compassionate discipline allows me to look and respect and honor and cherish. Allows me to see clearly the pain and the suffering of others and the role that I might play in that. Either deepening that suffering, alleviating that suffering, or being neutral as an influence to that suffering. Strictness isn't necessarily going to allow me to do that. And again, I'm using that word in a particular context right now. Because I can hear somebody on, messaging through YouTube saying, well, they're actually kind of the same thing. Like, no, they're actually not in this application. In this application, they're very different. We have to pick and choose the way we're going to use words. We can't let everything be an umbrella. Some things have to be specific. So if what you want is to be a more compassionate person, if what you want is to walk through the world and have a different level of understanding, a different level of presence, and even a different level of happiness, then you need to practice discipline, not strictness. Compassionate discipline. Compassionate discipline is not about excuses. And that's something else too, is to say that people, when they hear this term compassionate discipline, sometimes it's kind of a permission of sorts to the ego. Like, well, I'm tired this morning, so I'm not going to get up. No, that's not compassionate discipline. Compassionate discipline is not giving in to one's own whims. Compassionate discipline is when we acknowledge, I feel tired this morning. Gee, I wonder why. Maybe if I know I'm going to be getting up at 5 a.m. to do my practice in the morning, I should go to sleep an hour earlier and turn off the television. I shouldn't eat so heavy after 6 p.m. And also, compassionate discipline empowers us to understand that the more we get up at 5 a.m. to do our practice, or whatever time it happens to be, the more we're going to want to go to bed earlier, because the practice is going to mean something to us eventually, if it doesn't at first. Its meaning, its symbology for us, its purpose is going to grow. So we don't just focus on force. I'm going to stay up. I'm going to have my loaded nachos at 9 p.m. I'm going to have my ice cream at 10. I'm going to go to bed at 12. I'm going to get up at 5. The get up at 5 is the only one of those that don't feed the ego. So that one's going to lose out, right? So the discipline comes into play that says, one feeds the ego and one feeds the heart. Which one do you want to feed? And then you get to make an informed decision. You get to make an informed decision. And you don't have to use words like never. Well, I'm never going to have loaded nachos after 9 p.m. again. That's, first of all, silly and probably not at all true. Instead, you say, I'm going to break this habit. This is not going to be my habit any longer. But I can see that there might be a time when you're out at the movies with your friends or something like that on a special night, and you're up late and out come the loaded nachos. Mm-hmm. And now you tell me honestly, not one of you have ever had guilt over that, right? Never. Why have guilt over it? If it's no longer your habit, then if it comes about once in a while, you can enjoy it appropriately. But if it's your habit, then there's no enjoyment. There's only a habit. Does that make sense? So if it becomes a habit, there's no enjoyment. But if every once in a while, like I said, you're out with your friends and they're like, let's get ice cream. And you're like, well, it's after 6 o'clock and I have to get up at 5 a.m. And then all of a sudden, you know what your mind is going to do with that? Your ego is going to say, see, you're missing out again because of that yoga practice. See? You don't have to do your yoga practice tomorrow. Just go get the ice cream. That whole conversation with yourself can be alleviated if you practice compassionate discipline. Swamiji, when he would come visit here, he used to make me laugh so much. When he would come visit here, we would be out doing something, running errands, whatever, or he'd be doing one of his programs over at the hospital over in Toms River, New Jersey. And this one time particularly, he got done teaching, and he said, pizza. And I looked at him and I said, what? And he said, pizza. New Jersey pizza. And coffee. And I looked at him, I said, Swamiji, you're not supposed to have that. And he said, I'm not here very often. This is not a habit. This will be an enjoyment. Now let's go get it. So we did. We did. And he enjoyed it. And it was wonderful to see him enjoy it. It was wonderful to see him, so wise and yet so childlike in some ways, just really enjoying his New Jersey pizza and coffee. But if I was of the strict mindset of, this is not on your approved food list, this is not the food that you should be eating, then I would not be able to feel joy in my heart over his enjoyment. I would only remain critical of his choices. Right? Yeah. But it's difficult, because at what point does a simple, subtle enjoyment become a habit? And that's where you have to do your work honestly and openly with yourself and look at it and say, well, is my meal balanced? Are all my meals balanced for the most part? Do I drink too much coffee, alcohol, soda? Are there many artificial flavors and colors in the foods I eat? Do I use foods that I know Ayurvedically I should not be using because they irritate me somehow or another, but I do it anyway? Compassionate discipline allows us to ask those questions and then understand a little bit more about the answer to them and accept the answer more readily. Strictness just says, no. Don't do it. Is there ever a time where strictness can be functional and appropriate? Of course. As a matter of fact, perhaps when we first start making change, when we first, that first moment when we wake up and say, I'm not going to drink anymore. There's definitely going to be strictness at first. And maybe there has to be a little bit, because there has to be a show of willpower. And the strict mentality is going to come in and say, no. But then you can marry that strictness with the compassionate discipline and follow that up with, these are the reasons why. So I'm not just saying no to alcohol. I'm saying, these are the reasons why. And I'm accepting the responsibility of these reasons. I know that these reasons exist. I know that I have experienced the consequences of alcohol consumption. And you know what? I didn't like the consequences of it. So, AA says do this many steps. I will do those many steps. Now, initially, when a person goes into AA, they don't know the rest of it. They don't know that AA also talks about love and faith and community. They only think it's strict. So in those first couple of steps, those first few moments, a little bit of strictness is going to be there. But just be mindful not to accept strictness only. Maintain space for the compassionate discipline too, so that you continue to grow and learn and appreciate. And so that concepts like love and faith and community and charity can grow and prosper within you. Does that make sense? Questions or reflections now? Yes.
I was reflecting a little bit, just thinking about just the difference of the compassion, because I was raised in it, like from infancy on into a very fundamental, like Christian world, and that you could only exist in the strictness. But what it actually did for me was kind of kill my compassion, because their life is falling apart because they didn't follow the rules, right? So it's really sad to think about how that can really change a person or change your ideology. And it was so much about like yourself has to die. Like you can't have self-happiness or self-joy, because that's not what life is about. It's like God wants you to make other people happy first. Then it was like this whole like Jesus and others in you. What a wonderful way to spell joy. It was like the most sick and twisted thing I could really think of now as an adult. But as a kid, I was like, yes, I must do this. But it really, like I said, it does the opposite is true. So I'm enjoying hearing this, because the difference is so clear, but not once has anyone ever really explained it that way. So thank you.
Absolutely. You're very welcome. And being baptized myself as an infant and being raised in a similar tradition, there was a lot of that also, most definitely. Children are seen and not heard.
Blind obedience.
When absolutely 100% blind obedience. But there's always, no matter who the person is, if someone tells you you must be blindly obedient, there's always something in your heart or mind screaming, no. But then the ego comes forward and says, well, that's easy, because if I'm blindly obedient, then I could just blame somebody else. Yeah, I don't need much more of a reason than that. Right? So the ego doesn't want to question. The ego, when it's not healthy, and most times it's not healthy, the ego doesn't want to have to do the work. The ego doesn't want to have to practice the compassion. The ego wants the easy way toward enjoyment. And there is a bit of a contorted enjoyment in strictness. It is the adrenaline that comes from the application of violence, whether by thought or action. There is a corrupted enjoyment there. Corrupted enjoyment. When we think we're right and we're going to tell you how right we are and how bad you are because we're right and you're not. There's something that does to the ego, and then the ego thinks that it's getting something. It thinks that it's growing, that it's powerful, and it likes that. So to come out of that situation where a person has been reared in a practice similar to that, and then to restructure, so to unlearn and then to re-educate is a huge undertaking in life, very huge undertaking. And even in these traditions, in the yoga traditions, there are absolutely strict schools. There are schools where you do this number of that. I suppose I just feel very fortunate that my guru was compassionately disciplined, very compassionate, very disciplined. He would sit there and he would say, do this, do this, do this, do this. But if you can't, then do this. It's okay. It's okay. Then we'll do this. He was always about finding the thing that fit you, that fit the individual, because he understood that we're not cookie cutters. We can't just all fall in line like those little toy soldiers, that each one of us is here for a particular karma, set of karmas. We're each here for particular reconciliations. We're all here to have particular experiences unique to our own self and to our own karmas and our own reconciliations. And so that's the way that we can meet each other, is through that understanding. And that for some of you in this room, certain rules might be really supportive, and for others in this room, no, not really. And so our being able to recognize that it's not one size fits all. When it's one size fits all? When we've all reached enlightenment. That's when it's one size fits all. Yeah? That's because we won't care. It's like there's going to be no ego there, so it won't even be an issue. One size fits all because the light is for everybody. But until then, it's not one size fits all. It's who are you? What is your condition? What is your temperament? Where are you on your path right now? What stresses and struggles are you dealing with? What influences are really strong for you right now? And how can we best moderate some of those influences through diet and lifestyle and spiritual practice to create a little bit of space, a little bit of an open window, so that through that fresh air, through that beautiful little breeze that comes in through that slightly open window, you feel that the optimism is with you. Not false optimism or rose-colored glasses, but an optimism of understanding that none of this is for nothing. All of this is for something. This entire exploration of life, every experience that you will ever have, has purpose to it. You may not like some of them. I know I haven't liked some of them. But that doesn't mean that they were without purpose. Every single thing in this life has shown me something, has taught me something. And my current state, my temperament in a given moment is what either allowed me to receive what was being taught or turn my back to it or misunderstand it. So the more work that you allow yourself to do, sadhana work, internal work, that you allow yourself to do, the more you're willing to receive life as it comes to you. And the less and less and less you'll blame, grasp, see it as someone else's issue, someone else's fault. Well, if only you would fall in line, then this would be fine. It doesn't work that way. You can fall in line, all you're going to fall in line, and I'm still going to be who I am. You know? And if I'm looking for someone to blame or something to go wrong, then I'll find it. No matter how much you fall in line. Yeah? Do a time check. Okay. So discipline is really important in our spiritual practice, compassionate discipline. Compassionate discipline is also what allows us to feel. It's what allows the heart to open to the grace of divinity. Strictness is what causes an individual to be within a practice. And I'm thinking of the floggings. You know, I'm thinking of the monks back in the day, and they would hit themselves and hit themselves and hit themselves and hit themselves in order to overcome human desires, human-driven emotions. And I'm not saying that what they did was wrong. It was what they did. You know, they learned what they learned from it. Look, whatever you go through, no matter what we talk about here, no matter what I say, whatever it is that you go through in your life has purpose to it. So that had purpose to it. Even though we'd like to look and say, that had no purpose. The austere practices of the classical yogis thousands of years ago, where they would eat 1 grain of rice a day, you know, where they would hang upside down from a tree branch for months on end, where they would hold their breath, you know, for crazy amounts of time. These things, we look at that and we're like, oh man, that's extreme. But it had purpose. Its purpose, even though we might not completely see it, was that now today, we have a different understanding in yoga because of the work that they put in and because of their strict application to a particular set of guidelines. We do benefit from that. So it's not that, let's see if I can say this eloquently, it's not that we should turn away from strictness and say, I'm never going to be strict. It's the mindset that we're applying to anything that we do. So if we understand that in this moment, I can have an experience of whatever needs to be done, and I can approach that experience strictly, and that's going to greatly limit my experience of what it is that I'm doing, and probably deepen my suffering, possibly. Or I can practice compassionate discipline and have this experience from that perception, from that place of compassionate discipline. And that's going to have a different consequence to it. Whatever choice you make is the choice you make. Both of them are going to have some kind of purpose. Both of them are going to bring you something. But like you said earlier, and so eloquently, you spent a lot of years learning how to do it someone else's way. Now, learn how to do it yours and understand why you're doing it, how you're doing it. Be willing to experience the consequences of whatever choice it is that you make. I went a little bit off there, but do you all see what I'm saying? Yeah. So I'm not saying like the great yogis of the past, what they did opened so many doors for us in our understanding, but also was a little bit of a slippery slope, because look at how many of the spiritual texts today are misunderstood, are being held in ignorance, you know? So there's this constant interweaving. And it's very hard sometimes to unthread those threads that have been knotted together. It's very difficult sometimes to say only this or only that. So we don't. We say, do you understand the difference And are you living your life from a place, making your decisions from a place of knowing the difference? And truly knowing the difference, not just telling yourself that you do and then not. Do you understand the difference between strict and compassionate discipline? And are you living life from the place of that understanding? Or are you choosing to be strict because that's what you've been taught, or that's what's easier, or that's what's most comfortable? Because you can really zone out when you're strict. You don't really have to feel much of anything. But if you want to be at the altar in a full pranam with tears coming down your cheeks in a bath of love for God, then compassionate discipline might be far more purposeful for you. But if you want to be able to sit there and not feel anything, if you want to be able to sit there and not have the heart be activated, then strict might be the way to go. All depends on what you're looking for. Compassionate discipline. As much as possible. As much as possible. I think about people who, have you ever seen a video of the people at the Wailing Wall? Oh, goodness. Anybody here? It's beautiful, isn't it? It's a wall, and they go there and they wail. And why do they wail? Do you know?
I don't know, for all the sins of the world.
Well, for all the sins of the world, but for all the suffering of the departed souls, and for all the suffering of the current world too. Yeah. Now, that's not your practice. Obviously, nobody raised their hand. Could you see yourself doing that? Could you see yourself going on an annual pilgrimage? Now, on an annual pilgrimage, and it's not an easy pilgrimage, to a place where you can simply wail, cry, chant in particular mantras for the suffering of those who have been past and the suffering of those who still are, for the sins of the world. So, compassionate discipline in my heart and mind is more conducive to a practice like that than strictness is. Because when you undertake something like that, why are you doing it but for your heart to break open? And for all the love that you carry within you to be spilt out, not as wasteful milk spilt on the ground, but as a healing salve for the hearts of all those who are suffering. And we have the mantra, Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Translated, it means, may all beings be peaceful, free from suffering. But the Jiva Mukti lineage added, I believe it was a Swami from southern India who was related to the Jiva Mukti lineage, added, and may my thoughts, words, and actions have something to do with that alleviation of suffering. So in other words, may I not cause suffering to any other being. May I not contribute to suffering of any other being. Instead, may I contribute to peace. May I contribute to happiness for all. And in order to fulfill that intention, there has to be discipline because we have to control our impulses. But there also has to be compassion. Why would you want it for other people if there wasn't? There's no reason. If it was just a cold, hard strictness, you wouldn't be concerned about it. You would just say they're suffering because they're misbehaving. If they didn't misbehave, they wouldn't be suffering. And then you would have no cause to do anything except continue whatever you're doing. So the compassionate discipline is key on our spiritual path. It's absolutely key. And discipline can be very strenuous. It can require a lot of you. Absolutely. Willpower? Yes, 100%. The pilgrimages that you go on that are actual, genuine earthly pilgrimages, or the pilgrimage that you're taking from here to yourself, is not an easy path. And so you need to have discipline to stay on that path, to not veer off into, the realm of distraction, grasping, attachment. But if you flavor that discipline with just a touch of compassion, a good dose of love, some patience, a willingness to make mistakes and then stand back up again, try again, but never with self-hate and never with hatred of others, because the two are diametrically opposed to one another. And when we practice something that's cold and hard, like strictness, there's a component of lashing the self there. There's a component of self-hate, self-disapproval, self-judgment, and therefore judgment of others. We'll never get to peace through violence. We just won't. We will only get to peace by way of peace. And peace itself is a discipline. It is a compassionate discipline. It's saying, I've suffered and I know I didn't like it. You've suffered and I can only imagine that you didn't like it. So let us not cause each other suffering any longer. Let's be at peace with one another. And whatever my behaviors are, I will correct them as best I can. And you'll do what you do. Questions, reflections? Yes?
I'm trying to think of when you have to work with or achieve a goal with, say, something like parenting with somebody who maybe has more of a strict mindset. Maybe they were raised more to just believe this, and that's what you believe. There's not really a reason. But you're trying to, I've been back and forth in my mind, trying to help them understand compassion and discipline would be better than strictness, but I'm also telling myself, you can't really make someone else understand. You have to just do yourself, and then how do you best position yourself to be able to effectively work with somebody?
Absolutely. We can't require anybody else to adhere to anything. You can't require anybody else to do anything. It's a fallacy. We have laws on the books. Laws are made why? To try to conform society to particular behaviors. There's a law on the books that says you shouldn't speed over the speed limit, right? How many of you speed? Okay, so you cannot make anybody do anything. All you can do is live by the example of what you wish to project into the world yourself. And so this is a radical independence of sorts that yoga espouses, is to say, the world is what you make of it. It has nothing to do with anybody else. It has only to do with you. So there can be all the dictators, there can be all of the corruption, there can be all of the whatever, there can be all of the violence out there in this human-made world. But none of that has anything to do with who you really are. You only think it does. And because you believe that it has something to do with who you are, you take a stand of some sort or another, a position of some sort or another, either for or against or something, even neutral. I'm neutral. I'm Switzerland, according to the spiritual teachings, we need to come to the place where we look out into the world and we recognize what's going on out there has nothing to do with how I show up. How I show up in this world is my decision and my decision alone. And so the best thing that we can do for ourselves and for others is to show up truly in the light of who we really are. And that's not a reactive individual or an individual who requires societal norms to be adhered to, these things are all enculturated into us. These are all based on experiences that we've had in the world. And you also can't go to somebody, you could try, but it's most times not going to work, and say to them, well, if you would only look at this from a broader perspective. They're not taught how to look at it from a broader perspective. That's like telling someone who has never learned algebra, if you would only understand this equation, then you would get it. They don't even know what they're looking at. They have no idea what that means, So how can we do that? How can we go out into the world and tell people what they should and shouldn't do? It's easier if they see you. They see you. They see you peaceful. They see you happy. And they say, they might come to you at some point and be like, you always seem so peaceful when there's something irritating going on. How do you do that? And you're going to get those kind of questions. And that's the opportunity to say, well, I practice meditation, I practice yoga, this is what I do, that's what I do. I have faith in goodness, whatever your answer might be. And so it's more of a let them witness. Let them witness. Because you can't fight them on the grounds of their own ignorance. You can't shine a light for them. It just doesn't work that way. Yeah. It would be nice if it did, right? Yeah. They say, we're all ignorant, and the ignorant cannot lead the ignorant out of ignorance. Not at all. So all we can do is try to be as much as possible within the light of the truth of ourself, as much as possible, and let that be the impact that we have on the world around us. But more on ourselves, Many traditions do say, do for others first. Well, we say it's very important to support others. But it's important that you know where that's coming from. It's important that it be done with a whole heart. And not just out of strict adherence to what somebody else told you had to do. You give because it's good. Because it lightens your burden and theirs. Because there's some part of you that actually derives a benefit from that. And that part of you is the part that usually doesn't like yourself very much. So when you do something kind, when you do something good, they say, oh, well, you should do it out of altruism. Well, nobody is altruistic in this world unless they're a saint, first of all. Altruism, and it's been shown in research, people do not behave altruistically. People who are charitable because it feels good. People who go and serve food at the soup kitchen do so because they enjoy doing it. And research has also shown that type of behavior, the positive impact it has on one's own emotional mental state, is just as powerful as the impact of certain drugs that a person can get addicted to. Both are very powerful, the impact that they have on us mentally and emotionally. But the difference is that one is for the better of all beings, and the other is not. The other only deepens suffering. So be the example. Just be the example. And then if they have questions, answer their questions. One last real quick one. So I've been, throughout my life, either a vegan or a vegetarian, raw foodist, And I've never made it a point to say that to anybody. If I'm invited to go out to dinner and I just order what I order. because I don't want other people to feel defensive if they're like, oh, she's a vegetarian, she's a vegan. I used to work in a law office, and we would go out for, like holiday meals and stuff like that as a group. And inevitably, the attorney that I worked with, he would always sit next to me and he would order something on the menu, and then he would elbow me and say, sorry. And I would say, you eat what you eat, I'm going to eat what I eat. You don't need to advertise it to me, and I don't need to advertise it to you. And so he would apologize, and then he'd do the same thing again at the next party. But this other time, I'm in the pharmacy, and I was looking for a particular product. And the product was a vegan product. So I didn't say that to the woman behind the counter. I just said, I'm looking for this particular product. Well, I don't have that, but I have this, this, and this. And I said, no. I said, I was really looking for the other one. I've heard great things about it. She kept pressing. She kept saying, well, why do you want the other one? Why do you want the other one? And I just turned around to her and I said, well, I prefer to have the other one because it's a vegetarian. She asked me like 5 times. So I finally said to her, because it's a vegetarian product. And she looked at me and her whole demeanor changed. And she said, oh yeah? Well, you're one of those. Let me just ask you, what are your shoes made of? Now I acknowledge, got the hair on the back of my neck a little up. And I said to her, well, they're not leather. And she went, oh, no way. Do you know how many people I asked that question to and they can't answer because their shoes? And in that moment, I just so regretted saying to her why I wanted that product, because look at the turmoil that my answer caused her. It caused her to become violent. It caused her to become self-defensive. It caused her to speak out about other people in a way that was hurtful. So in that moment, I really just had to wrap my mind again around the idea of I'm just asking for what I'm asking for, no reason, Because if a person is not ready to hear it, they're not ready to hear it, no matter what it is. No matter what it is. But your words and the way that you present them have a dire impact on people. Big lessons, right? Yeah. Did somebody else have their hand up before? We have another minute or two before we have to. We're good? Okay. Let's sit tall. Close the eyes. One hand on the heart, one hand on the belly. And perhaps in this moment, if you are so called, make a vow to yourself that as you move forward on this path, forward through this life, forward through this day, that you'll investigate the difference between strict and compassionate discipline as they have been talked about during this particular class. Look at the places where you're cold and decisive versus the place where you are warm and considerate, but still steadfast in your discipline. Look at the differences and see the impact that they have on you. Which one is serving you better? Which one is serving the purpose of your own self-awareness? And then honor whatever it is that you think you found. Knowing that whatever you find today is still not the whole story. There'll be more to find tomorrow. Draw the hands together in front of the heart, and we'll lift our voices in one Om, followed by the All Beings mantra. Taking a breath in. Om. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Om Shri Matre Namaha. Thank you all so much for being here today. So wonderful to see and gather with each and every one of you. they're serving brunch now, so enjoy. It looks wonderful, as always. And for those coming into the Ayurveda, we'll meet in here at about 5 after 1, so everybody has enough time to have their lunch and enjoy it. And for everybody else, we'll see you next time. Very good. Thank you all.